The internet can be a wonderful place, filled with creative and unique people from all over the world. But often, it just turns into a battle of opposing opinions. Even when the opposing sides seem, well, pretty similar. And one topic in the early days of the internet seemed to get two sides very riled up. Who was the better Mystery Science Theater host? Were you a fan of original host Joel Hodgson, aka Joel Robinson, the founder of Mystery Science Theater and first host? Or did you prefer Mike Nelson, the show's head writer and second host? This feud may seem like nothing now, but in the primitive days of the internet and early forum discussions, this was a heated debate. So if you thought fan bases getting upset, flame wars, and trolling is a new thing, it's not. These people were putting in the extra effort to hate on somebody. They had to do it through dial-up. So what even is Mystery Science Theater 3000? Well, maybe Penn Jillette could describe it for you.
There's this janitor, Joel. He's been marooned on a satellite by a couple of mad scientists so they can study how he reacts to a relentless visual diet of dumb movies.
And even if you haven't grown up with this show, a lot of the content creators you see nowadays directly credit Mystery Science Theater as being an influence.
And I think a huge little subculture, for better or for worse, has sprung from it, almost as a direct result of you guys.
What do you think of people like the Nostalgia Critic and the Cinema Stop doing the thing you're doing now?
Great question. There are so many people doing like movie riffing and media critique now. I'm great with it. There's some people that are really good at it, some people that I just don't like. I think the biggest rule for me is when someone's going to be a movie riffer is just don't be a
Nimbus.
In the late 80s to the early 90s, you have to remember that riffing was considered a new art form to create a show around.
If not for Mystery Science Theater, you don't have the soup, you don't have all the branches off of that, and you don't really have this industry now of people commenting on other things.
And this type of content brought with it a very passionate fan base.
It's the kind of humor that hasn't really been on like before, or really done before.
And is an early example of one of those shows that you have to be smart to understand.
So much bizarre humor that if you've got that sort of mentality for it, then you'll get a lot out of it.
These fans considered the riffing to be some sort of social commentary. But Mike Nelson is on record as thinking that's a little overblown. They were just making jokes.
To be honest, I always thought that kind of commentary thing was a little overblown, because in the early days we got that a lot. Like, this is taking pop culture and throwing it back. It's like, well, it is sort of in its structure, but it was never an intent of ours to do, that it was a deep underlying commentary. It was always just, this is a great vehicle to throw out a lot of jokes and make people happy.
MST3K's very first host was Joel Robinson, played by Joel Hodgson. Joel Robinson plays a lowly janitor who gets shot up to space and is forced to watch bad movies. To help him not lose his sanity, he builds his two robot pals, Crow T. Robot and Tom Servo. Joel Hodgson was a stand-up comedian and had been getting national exposure for years up to this point.
Every good comic worth his salt knows how to use a rubber chicken, right? But this is a special rubber chicken because he's reversible.
And in his spare time, Joel liked to create his own robots. Something we all like to do in our spare time. Joel would come up with the idea of combining stand-up with his love of making robots. Because he had national television exposure, Joel was able to pitch the idea that eventually became MST3K to a man named Jim Mallon, who just happened to work at the local television station. Now, remember the name Jim Mallon. It's going to play a huge part in the Mike vs. Joel feud. Joel never saw himself as a host. In fact, he wanted his comedian friend Jerry Seinfeld to host this.
I actually pitched him an idea for a science fiction movie starring him. And he said to me, I'll try to do an impression of him if I can. Joel, this is not a movie for me. This is a movie for you. And he said, you know, he kind of made me realize I was imposing what I wanted on him because he was famous. And it really got me thinking that maybe it's time that I think about a show for myself. So it really was, in a way, the origin, part of the origin of MST.
Our second host, Mike Nelson, was originally brought on the show to be just a transcriber, and then became the show's head writer.
Another guy, Josh Weinstein, who was the original, who was Lawrence Earhart, but he was only in the first season. And he brought Mike along, who's our head writer.
I knew some of the people involved with Mystery Science from doing stand-up comedy. And I got this call from Josh Weinstein, who also was on the first season, and he did stand-up as well. And he said, you want to come down and do this typing for this weird show that we're working on? And I said, sure, I'll do that, because Fridays isn't all that rewarding. So I went down and hit it off with the guys, and I had been with them ever since.
Because, as this clip will prove, Mike Nelson always had the funniest lines in the writer's room.
And we'd be throwing out these sort of middling, crummy, occasionally nice jokes, and then every time Mike would say something, he would knock the ball out of the park. And just, you know, the room would just collapse in laughter, and we'd have to stop the tape and keep on moving. And then we realized, you know, Mike is one of the 6 or 7 funniest people on the planet, and maybe we should make him a writer.
So of course it would seem natural that if Joel had to go, the show's head writer and occasional guest actor, Mike Nelson, would be its logical successor. Mike would join in the middle of season 5 and ride out the rest of the show's run on Comedy Central. And then another 3 seasons when the show was renewed on Sci-Fi Channel. So let's return to that name I mentioned earlier, Jim Mallon.
We're talking to Jim Mallon, who not many people really know about it, and although he does have many important jobs at MST 3000. What exactly do you do for the show, Jim?
Well, I'm the voice of Gypsy. I'm also the producer of the show and the president of this fine Best Brains Corporation, which sole production is Mystery Science.
In MST3K circles, Jim Mallon is a divisive name.
It all started in 1988 when Jim Mallon and Kevin Murphy hired Joel Hodgson to turn one of his hilarious sketch ideas into a television show.
Kevin was with Jim, who's our producer. They worked together at this little TV station where we started doing Mystery Science Theater. And then I met Jim because I shared a warehouse. We didn't share a space, but my workshop was in the same building as his office. So he invited me to come to TV 23.
Does everybody own a piece of it, or?
Actually, the company is owned by 4 of us, Joel and myself and Tracy Kevin.
Often seen as the person who drove the rest of the cast away, the non-artistic person, but you can kind of see both sides, because he is the engine that got the show on the air and kept it on the air.
When we come to the set, and Joel and the bots are ready to perform, we have to make sure all the props are there, the lighting set, the cameras there, the technical room set, that the tape is in the machines, that the scripts are ready, that the props are ready. And it is my job to make sure all those elements are ready, but more importantly, the atmosphere is set so that the performers can do their best work.
And looking back at archival footage, you can kind of sense the amount of stress that a guy like him and even the rest of the crew was under. They had made a heavy commitment to put out a lot of episodes.
We're under contract from HBO in New York, and we are given money, and we are required to deliver product on time and on schedule.
But we probably have about 20 more of those, and then we got re-signed for more, so there's about 40 shows coming after like this weekend, so we'll be making them a long time.
We're going on a 3rd year of production. We have work scheduled through 4 years, and it's a challenge to keep everybody all revved up all the time.
Even looking back at the forum posts from around that time period, fans were able to pick up on the burnout that was happening with the cast and crew. Even pointing out that Joel kind of looks a little checked out. Though this article from the New Orleans Times seems to suggest that Joel's not checked out. They're just shooting early in the morning and he's tired. That same 1992 article also seems to suggest that Joel and the company have other projects that aren't the show in the works.
What would you do another series? I mean, would you be off doing another series?
Oh, sure. We're working on new ideas all the time, and so, but we're kind of have a contract for the next 2 years, so probably when we're done here, we'll have another show we'll want to be working on.
Joel vs. Mike is the sexy headline, but it really boils down to Joel versus Jim. From archived interviews, Jim Mallon comes across as the business guy.
The stars do get the credit for the show, and they deserve a fair amount of it because of the unique qualities that go into becoming a star. But as far as the production goes, the producer is really the one that is making sure that it all comes together. So it's an interesting process. Most people would be hard-pressed to know who any of the producers are for TV out there. So that's part of what you have to live with if you're going to be a producer.
The guy who was trying to keep Mystery Science Theater 3000 profitable. If you're working on the show should be the only thing that you think about. No outside projects. And that kind of work environment didn't work for Joel. You see, Joel's more of a free spirit. He wanted to work on new creative ideas.
My favorite thing is creating the stuff and working on it and making it and not necessarily performing it. I was a little more reluctant about that. And so over time, I think it took years though, I think by the time I was about getting out of there, I felt like, I kind of got this. I understand this, you know what I mean?
You feel a little burnout when you're trying to make the same thing over and over. Also, the show was taking over his entire life, and he just wanted a little time off. Time off was the exact opposite approach that Jim Mallon had. You see, at the same time they were making the show, they were also going on tour to perform it live. Burning the candle on both ends was a breaking point for Joel. The Mystery Science Theater newsletter, Satellite News, from summer 1993, has Joel remarking, "I see it as important to my own creative ecology to start dedicating more of my time to creating new shows, pop trends, and inventions." Joel wasn't planning to leave Mystery Science Theater 3000 forever. In fact, after his break, he was going to come back as part of the writing team and do a little directing. He did maintain ownership in the show, so he didn't want to see this thing fail. In some of the earliest frequently asked questions sections I saw on MST3K forums, people started speculating on how the departure was going to happen and why the departure took place. Joel would take a 3-month sabbatical, then come back for day-to-day operations for about 1/3 of the time, and go back to stand-up. Another forum post from 1993 seems to suggest that the transition from Joel to Mike was in place as far back as mid-1992. Some fans were believing that this was only a case of creative burnout on Joel's end, but later revealed to be more about separating Joel from Jim and keeping the show alive.
Well, I didn't really want to leave. I wasn't getting along with my partner at Best Brains, so it was the best thing to do at the time. And so I think I shaded it like it was some other reason other than that, because I didn't really want to hurt the production. I wanted it to keep going.
The fans started speculating and then leaking details online about how the Joel to Mike transition was going to take place. Joel's last episode was to happen Season 5, Episode 12.
In the middle of the 5th season, Joel left the show.
Okay, thanks, bye-bye! The film being riffed as Joel's swan song was Mitchell, a low-budget 1975 detective film starring Joe Don Baker.
We really want to send off Joel with a fantastic movie. No, it could have been any movie. It just happened to be Mitchell.
An episode that has become a fan favorite, even still being brought up today when anyone mentions the show, or the MST3K Shout channel decides to host a Thanksgiving Day marathon.
If you happen to be watching today during your Thanksgiving meal, don't forget to pass the potatoes, the peas, the butter, the peas, the pie, and the butter. Mitchell.
A fiendish plot by a diabolical duo threatens our hero on Mystery Science Theater 3000.
They're going to kill Joel!
The risky escape designed by a vacuum cleaner jettisons Joel into deep space.
I'm in charge.
What will become of the satellite of love?
When we were doing Mitchell, it was kind of weird because it was Joel's last episode, and it was just kind of strange, and yet at the same time it was business as usual.
Hey, hi everybody. It's 7 p.m. on Saturday. We're going to be doing the movie Mitchell. I'm going to escape the satellite and get back to Earth.
In the episode Mitchell, we're introduced to Mike. Mike is our new temp who's been hired by the Mads. Gypsy believes that the Mads are going to kill Joel.
Gypsy, honey, I could never leave you. It's all for one and one for all. That's the Robinson way.
Oh, no.
Mike and Gypsy discover a hidden escape pod.
According to this, there's a single occupant escape pod called the Deus Ex Machina.
How could I not see it? Dumb, stupid, dumb.
I wouldn't blame yourself, Gypsy. Apparently it's in a box marked Hamdingers.
Where they send Joel back to Earth.
Hey guys, look at me. I'm on my way to Earth. Pretty crazy, huh?
Panicking, the Mads hold Mike captive. So with Joel gone, Mike was in charge of the bots.
They'll send us a new guy?
Oh, sure. They're bound to. But
The unenviable task of replacing him went to Mike Nelson.
What's the name on that? Nelson. Mike Nelson.
And the plans were, other than a new host, this was still going to be the same show.
So I don't know if we ever, if any cast change caused us to really change the direction of the show. We always just felt like we got that movie just kind of as the anchor.
In a 1994 interview, they even played down the idea that there will be a difference between the previous regime and this one. Mike would take over in the episode, The Brain That Wouldn't Die.
wait.
Mike Nelson's first promo, take 28.
And action.
Hi, everyone. I'm the new guy. I'm Mike Nelson. This is the Satellite of Love. What else do I need to cover?
What do I do? What do I do?
As more Mike episodes began to air, the earliest seeds of the Joel vs. Mike flame war started sprouting.
They are so invested in this show. When something changes or something happens, they will call up. Why did this change? What happened? What are you guys doing?
Oh my gosh, look at that. Years of fan mail up there.
You'd go into a forum dedicated to Mystery Science Theater, and it would be littered with Mike versus Joel topics. It got so out of hand that some of these places made a rule to not even bring that up. Even if you were coming at that debate with actual earnest discussion and not just trying to start a flame war.
I'm Mike Nelson. I'm the new guy. Please be nice.
Joel's more physical, but Mike tells jokes that the common man can get. Joel's funnier, but Mike is more expressive. People who just started watching when Mike was the host, retroactively, weren't going to be Joel fans. MST3K always relied on having a very passionate fan base.
How long are you looking to last? I mean, how long do you think MST can last?
As long as people like you continue to watch. Keep watching.
We're talking MST3K fans. We're talking fanatics.
It was made for me. It's my personality, sense of humor. I get every joke.
It's been a constant surprise. I always imagined it would be like real video files and college kids that would like it, but it's really broad, and that's what's fun, is to hear from different people. So it's really one of those shows that it seems like a lot of different people like it.
The same type of passionate fan base you see today. But back then, it was a lot harder to mobilize. But these people were pioneers. They mobilized. When they didn't like something, their voices were heard.
But I think the fans helped a lot because I think executives were frightened of them. They didn't know what... There's this thing called the internet, and there's people who really love the show, and if we cancel it, who knows what will happen. So I liked having that sort of backing us up, like, hey, we got all these scary people that you don't know about.
And amassing an official fan club base of nearly 100,000 members.
They were the earliest adopters of internet culture. They had their own memes. They had their own ways of discussion. And since they had an outsider's mentality, they felt they were the only ones in the world who were getting this kind of humor. Misties were the earliest people to understand that the internet could be used to get what you want. If they were upset, they could let the network know.
The fans were able to scare the living hell out of the network people because they knew that if they did some little change or twitch to the program, they would simply clog up the fax machine with complaints, and these people couldn't conduct business sometimes because the phone would keep going.
When MST3K was canceled by Comedy Central, they worked together to get it picked back up by Sci-Fi.
And they started on the internet really early. I mean, there were members of the Well who were on these Usenet news groups. What was the one? RATMM, Rec Arts Television, and these people, they were passionate about it. There was a group, AOL Misty's Camp was one group, and then the Radom group was another group.
But while they could work together, most of the time was spent arguing. Pro Joel or pro Mike? I know many people who like Mike and think he's funny. I don't. I think he's nothing more than a ham with no talent, riding on the coattails of someone else. I think the show has gone downhill since Joel left. If anyone likes Mike better, why? Now that Mike has taken the helm, I find myself enjoying the show on a much less consistent basis. Mike is not as good as Joel. Most netters also think this. Face it, people, he is not Joel. Besides, what are you gonna do? Stop watching the show? Not bloody likely. The robots are Joel's, and no one can interact with him like Joel. Come back, Joel. I don't mind the new guy, but Joel was made for that show. But other Misties became Team Mike. I like Mike better. The skits and the back and forth are much better with Mike than Joel. I think Joel was getting pretty burned out by the end anyway, for some reason. I watched an episode with Joel. I thought he was much worse than Mike. Mike wins the poll. I started watching when Mike joined up. I've seen Joel stuff, and I don't care much for his delivery. Mike can hold his own against the old episodes pretty well. I love Joel as much as the next guy, but Mike is a great choice to follow in Joel's footsteps. I, like you, I'm sure, love the show. I needed to get through life. Joel's gone, folks. Let him go. Mike's here. Live with it. And would you believe it? Some people were level-headed and realized you can like both hosts. In fact, Mike Nelson was the head writer during Joel's time, so it's not like things changed that much. He might be the needed energy after Joel's burnout. And since you know this is the internet and things haven't changed that much, it wasn't always civil. Mike is nowhere near as cheesy and lame as Phil Collins. What did Phil Collins have to do with any of this? MST3K just isn't as funny as it used to be. It was good while it lasted. Time to put down the puppets and move on to other things. The jokes aren't as funny. The show is quite obviously skewed to a young audience now. I mean, for God's sakes, welcome back Cotter jokes? Mike, just what exactly do you do for a living? It sure doesn't seem to be heckling movies. It's said that you could look back at an early Joel Hodgson episode and smell which sketches are Mike written. They're usually the marginally funny ones that go on for hours. Mike made the show sexist. Mike made Comedy Central cancel the show. After leaving the show, Joel's first post-MST3K gig would be writing for comedian Paula Poundstone's primetime sketch show.
History, exactly. At what point in conversation do you turn to somebody and go, geez, guess Lincoln's dead, huh?
Joel and his brother Jim would also form a company, Visual Story Tools, in 1995. And I looked into some of the projects. There was this one product where you'd put something inside your VCR and it would hatch. And then you'd have like sea monkeys on the screen of your television. Joel would also try to make a return to television by creating his own show. First it was called The Xbox.
My name's Joel Hodgson, and you're inside the Xbox. It's an idea I came up with one day, and this is another idea I came up with one day. Anyway, everything happens live inside the Xbox.
What a dumb name. Who'd call their product that? That pilot was reworked, and it would air on Comedy Central just one time, under the name The TV Wheel.
Hi everybody, my name's Joel Hodgson, and Comedy Central has been very brave and generous to allow me to show my latest offering, The TV Wheel.
This special even featured Nick Bakay.
We believe that every human soul has its own companion robot, on its very own star in outer space.
And you'd know him as the voice of Salem the Cat from the hit show Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which had just started airing on ABC.
Weird. Suddenly I wish I had every episode of Mystery Science Theater on tape.
Where TV's Frank was now one of the head writers. And Joel Hodgson was even the show's magic consultant. Joel would then guest star on the TV show Freaks and Geeks, which had a writer he was quite familiar with, Josh Weinstein. Also on the show was Trace Beaulieu. So it would seem to the outsider that Joel didn't have a problem with his old castmates. Why'd he leave the show? He seems to still enjoy riffing. He did it on an episode of Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Hey Joel, let's make fun of a movie. Let's try that here, you and me.
No.
Mo, roll film.
He even wrote an episode for Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
It's so weird because if... Oh, yeah. I'm thinking, like, kind of like... I haven't really figured out any kind of...
With more time passing since the departure, fans started to warm up to Mike. The show had made a pretty smooth transition.
Mike Nelson.
We had very capable people taking over these roles, which was really nice. You know, Mike taking over from Joel brought a different spin, sort of freshened the show a little bit, but didn't drastically change it. You know, this is much better than the whole Dick Sargent debacle.
Even feeling comfortable enough to drop a few references to Joel.
Oh, wow, great sweater, Chip. Thanks. Look at that, it says, Joikey on it.
Yeah, well, I started knitting it for the other guy a long time ago, and then, well, you know.
I'm not attempting to denigrate Joel's contributions to MST3K, but Mike comes across as a brighter, more interesting guy. Joel's departure from Best Brains has not been the disaster that many predicted. In some ways, the show is even better. I wouldn't go as far as to say that I like him better than Joel, but then I wouldn't say I like Joel better than Mike either. I think Mike is rather cool, and I think we can expect a lot more wiser wisecracks from him. And did you notice that the bots are also getting a lot nastier? He writes his own stuff, and he wrote Joel's too. If you like Joel, you should like Mike.
How did you like ascending to the highest level, so to speak?
It's actually been very good, and support has been very nice, and thanks to everyone. And I still do the writing, so I kind of have the best of both worlds. It's the perfect job. It's not the cheese factory, but it'll do, you know.
After leaving, Joel would go on record as saying he no longer follows the show, as watching the show would feel too much like work.
I watched one. It was a Mike episode, and it was one about a head, like a head in a box that a guy. It was a black and white movie. Do you know which one I mean? Thing that wouldn't die. But it was really funny. I think it's a Servo line where he says, "Guy drops a head rolls into the corral. Horse thinks it's an apple and eats it." So that was my favorite right now.
I've never seen this one.
Have you haven't watched it?
Joel,
this is a first. This is an exclusive
When would I?
episode. Exclusive.
When in my day would I stop to watch it?
Soul Taker would see Joel return 6 years later for the very first episode of season 10.
Oh, it's just Joel.
Yeah, you're gonna get
that.
that.
Joel, it's Joel. Joel back.
This cameo would be the first time you see Mike Nelson and Joel Robinson interact as hosts.
Hey, who do we got here?
Mike, it's Joel. He's the guy who made us. He's gonna fix our ship.
Yeah, I know you. I'm wearing your tube socks.
Oh. Joel would come back on the ship to save the crew from impending doom.
Oh, well, I've updated all the necessary systems. You shouldn't have any problems for the next 10 years or 20 million miles, whichever comes first.
So why didn't Joel save Mike? Well, this one guy has a theory. He doesn't save Mike because being on the satellite of love made Joel the man he is today. And Joel wanted the same for Mike.
Hey, what about us? Can you take us with you?
No, I don't really want to.
Why? Why?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because the years I spent here on the satellite of love were the best damn years of my life, and I wouldn't want you mugs to miss a minute of it.
Really?
Yeah.
This cameo appearance made the real Joel Hodgson very nervous. going on record stating that he's not an actor, and he only had to really interact with the puppets, not real people. The actual process of creating Mystery Science Theater, he didn't feel like any time had really passed since he'd last hosted. Season 10 would be the last for the original run of Mystery Science Theater 3000, with its finale airing August 8th, 1999. So, with the show over, you'd think the fan base would simmer down. Joel vs. Mike wouldn't be a thing. But nope, here it is in the pre-9/11 world, and just a couple weeks later in the post-9/11 world. And now it's a thing that people who run entertainment blogs will try to present their own case for. Some of these discussions are simple who's better, while other people get real philosophical and talk about classism. But as the years keep passing since the last original episode, Mike versus Joel has become a civil discussion. In fact, a lot of times it just becomes, hey, they're both great. I love that show, and I loved them. When people try to start a flame war, it doesn't go anywhere. In fact, people kind of laugh it off like, hey, buddy, it's not 1994 anymore. It's over. It's done. The thing that was just as heated as a discussion about religion or politics has now become a been there, done that. Nobody's wrong, nobody's right. Mike Nelson would keep the riffing alive post-Mystery Science Theater.
Like, you learn about showbiz, you learn to keep your mouth shut in meetings, or what to say, or how to talk to executives, and obviously the whole creative process, how to work with other people. So pretty much, everything after that I learned doing Mystery Science.
He started up the film crew, where Bill Corbett, Kevin Murphy, and him discussed and riffed new movies. And many considered this a spiritual successor to Mystery Science Theater 3000. It was still bad movies being riffed on by the same crew you would have heard at the end of Comedy Central and Sci-Fi.
What's it like being with those same three guys for so long?
David, it's a nightmare. Help me. Get out of here. This is my secret cry for help.
And while people thought film crew was going to be the thing that takes over for Mystery Science Theater 3000, Jim Mallon was reported to have told Rhino that he'd pull distribution rights to Mystery Science Theater if they continued making film crew, because that's direct competition. Other people online say, no, Jim Mallon didn't do that. The actual reason film crew ended so early was because the original backers for the project left Rhino. Either way, film crew was over. But Mike Nelson was not going to let the world of riffing die. In 2006, he created Riff Tracks. The initial offerings from Riff Tracks were solo Mike riffs, but eventually became Mike, Kevin, and Bill.
At the sort of the ending days of Mystery Science, we were still having fun, and so we kept doing things and kept trying to do different projects together, and finally this one kind of congealed.
As of today, Riff Tracks has produced more riffs than the entire run of Mystery Science Theater. But Mike has always been on record as being extremely appreciative of everything that MST3K brought him.
Well, I mean, I can understand people still wanting to talk about it. It's obviously how we made our bones, and this is the style of humor that we're still doing now. Mm-hmm. So I totally get that. But yeah, it does. I mean, it has to change a little bit. There's something about, doing a puppet show, and I don't mean to be flip about this. I mean this seriously, because I thought about it. You kind of have to be a younger man. You have to do kind of the wackier things that we did. And I look at this as an evolution towards a little more of, like you say, it's evolved a little bit, and it's more of a voice acting thing. And we do, the updated movies require that we kind of update our point of view, and also the fact that we do good movies. It might be a subtle change, but I guess if you compare them side by side, say a season 3 of Mystery Science with what you do now, I don't think it would be that subtle. I think you'd see a pretty big difference, and I'm fine with that.
Joe Hodgson also felt the need to come back to riffing.
I always loved movie riffing. I always wanted to do it again. And at a certain point, after Mystery Science Theater got over, I noticed something very strange is it started to sell more and more, DVDs after it got off the air. And
I just started to think, maybe, we could.
There's still something there.
There's a market there that's not getting served with new content.
And along with other Mystery Science Theater cast members, they would start Cinematic Titanic. This starred Trace Beaulieu, Frank Conniff, Mary Jo Pehl, and J. Elvis Weinstein, alongside Joel Hodgson. So it seemed like everybody who had been involved with Mystery Science Theater now has a riffing camp that they're associated with, making some people believe that since there are now two different riffing factions that both came from the same show, there has to be some sort of conflict between the two teams. But in reality, the two crews have always been complementary with each other.
I love the idea that Crow's there and he's immediately saying, I'm different, which was really clever. And then there was other stuff I read about what you had said, and you were kind of saying, yeah, it's like Crow had a stroke because of his puppetry.
That was me trying to explain my terrible puppetry at first.
But it was such a great way to play it in that situation. You know what I mean? So both those things were really kind of said, you have to kind of start over. You were hitting the reset button both times, which is exactly what people needed.
And the Riff Track team is on record as saying, without Joel Hodgson, Riff Tracks doesn't exist.
Joel is truly the founder of the feast here, including eventually Riff Track. So give him another round of applause, please.
And with the internet making it much easier for people to see the old episodes, the fan base grew. Even though he had created his own riff show, Joel Hodgson would come back as the prodigal riffing son. That's right, he put back on the red jumpsuit. First, it was in a special skit only seen by people who got the replacement DVD that was sent to them after Rhino accidentally released a film that they didn't have rights to. With newfound interest, the Thanksgiving Day tradition of MST3K being marathoned was brought back. And who was our host? Joel Hodgson.
Oh, hi, dinner is almost ready. Before I give you the clues to the final MST3K episode, I just want to thank you for all your support over the last 25 years.
And this was much easier to do with Jim Mallon out of the picture. Shout Factory now owns proprietary rights, including all brand assets and global intellectual property. Jim Mallon no longer has control of the intellectual property. And that was how Joel was able to kickstart a new Mystery Science Theater 3000. With new host, Jonah Heston. Mike versus Joel should have been a thing that never happened. Even if Mike was to have still taken over for Joel, Joel said in an interview that he always pictured this show as being something that multiple people would host. There'd be new generations, like a Doctor Who.
I don't know. Let's see. Joel was more of kind of a god creator figure, and Mike is that perfect quarterback older brother with just the right thing to say.
Yeah, and Jonah's more of a podcast guy,
Yeah.
Great to listen to.
Yeah, and turn off whenever you want.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of pause it and come back an hour later to whatever 4-hour conversation he was having with himself anyway.
Joel Robinson would even join Jonah Heston on the MST Alive tour.
I am bringing up to you the one, the only, Joel Robinson!
And on the Cheesy Circus movie tour, Joel would be handling the riffing with just the bots for the first time since Mitchell.
Tom Servo. I'm not just a disembodied voice. I'm a robot too.
Joel vs. Mike was over. And in 2016, we had the MST3K reunion show. Everyone was back in the writing room together, coming up with riffs. Mike and Joel riffing alongside each other, along with the new guy, Jonah, Kevin, both crows, Bill, Trace, Mary Jo, Frank, Bridget.
Yes, we all were, except for that guy there. He didn't write for us.
No.
What the hell happened,
Hiker.
man? Pick up the slack. Come on. Yeah, I think so. Everyone here at this table wrote yes?
Yeah.
I think I have it right.
I can confirm that.
Yes.
Superman's super illegal puppy mill.
Aren't they the cutest puppies you ever saw?
They sure are, but did you ever see a puppy that wasn't cute?
Puppy that wasn't cute is a nickname for Jimmy Olsen.
The next best thing, you had me standing.
So it took almost 20 years, but Mike versus Joel is officially over. There is no feud. It's done. Move on. And if you can't move on, well, you should really just relax. Hey, this is Joe from VCAM TV Studios. If you want to learn more obscure history, like, comment, and subscribe. And suggest a topic. Because who the heck knows what I'm going to talk about next. And if you're asking me, am I a Mike versus Joel guy? My earliest childhood memories revolve around Joel. I think Joel has a very common voice. But I'm a Mike guy.
What? Did you do weird science?
Mystery Science Theater 2000.